Alrighty, I finally got my supper made. I put the Parmesan cheese and fresh tomatoes into the beefaroni. So that's quite a treat anyway. Yes, it is. It's not the San Francisco treat though, because that would be rice-a-roni. We don't want to go breaking any copyrights here. It's good. Oh man, that's good. Rocky is inside the camper. I finally coaxed him inside. So he's in there all safe and sound. It was a good day at work today. Other than there were some equipment failures and whatnot. There's always a few snafus though. But all in all, it was a pretty good day. Anyway, I'm going to tell you all a story now. I kind of have alluded to it. And I think it's time to tell it. Some of you may think I'm crazy when I tell you how things actually panned out. There's an aspect to this story of the supernatural. And anyway, I'll get to that. And there's also an aspect to this story of childhood sexual abuse. And there's also an aspect to this story of another thing that happened to me when I was a man, where I believe the same spirits that were active when what happened to me when I was a child, I believe those spirits came after me again in the form of another person. Anyway, I'll start out by talking about what happened when I was a child. This goes back to 1976, to October of 1976. I spent 56 days, it was October and November of 76. I spent 56 days at the Clark Institute of Psychiatry being used as a guinea pig in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. In 1976, I was 8 years old. Pardon my eating while I'm talking, but I haven't had a chance to eat. You can see it's dark out. I mean, other than a peanut butter sandwich, it's now 8 o'clock in the evening. Other than a peanut butter sandwich, I haven't had anything since breakfast, so, and I've worked all day, so very laborious work. I enjoy it, but it does take a lot out of me, especially that circular saw rigging there. That thing tears the guts out of me. So anyway, I do need to eat, but I'm going to tell you the story. I was used as a guinea pig for medical, well, for drug experiments mostly. I was given LSD, haloperidol, a bunch of other medications. Some of them were never even approved. The haloperidol gave me seizures and temporarily paralyzed me. It caused me to lose control of my bowels and my bladder, and they also caused me to it also caused me to lose the ability to speak. I had to teach myself how to know when I needed the toilet again, and also how to speak after I got home, because I had lost those abilities. Nobody helped me. In fact, I was beaten and ridiculed because I had lost those abilities. So that's just how it was. This isn't a crying session or anything. This is just, life is like that. And I would imagine everybody listening can tell, maybe not the same story as mine, because mine's pretty bizarre, but I'm sure you all can tell stories of heartache and abuse and nasty things that happen to you, and this just happens to be mine, that's all. This just happens to be a story about something that occurred in my life. Anyway, one of the things that happened when I was there is, in the wee hours of the morning, an orderly used to come into my room, and he'd be shining a flashlight. He'd wake me up, yelling at me, "Come on, let's go. Up, up, up. Hurry up. Come on. Hurry up." You know, shining a flashlight in my face. I'd get out of the bed all bleary-eyed and everything in the dark room with the flashlight shining in my face. He'd get behind me, and he'd walk me down to a washroom that was down the hall. It was a washroom that had a row of sinks along one wall, and there were some toilet stalls and some urinals, you know. Anyway, he'd walk me in there. I had two roommates. I had a Pakistani, 15-year-old Pakistani fella by the name of Rupinder, who had had a nervous breakdown because, well, he had lived in Ottawa after his family immigrated to Canada, and there was a lot of racism against Pakistani people in those days, and the racism drove him crazy, basically. In fact, they had even somebody had tried to shoot him to death. They nearly killed him. And it was only because he had something in his coat pocket that he didn't die. Slowed the bullet down. And the other fella I had living in the bed across from me was a fella by the name of Bruce. That was actually his name, and he was 20 years old, and he was a homosexual. And in 1976, that sort of thing wasn't really tolerated. Bruce was a very nice fellow. You know, he wasn't a bad guy, Bruce. But it was just in 1976, you know, it was a different world. Anyway, he had come out as a homosexual to his parents and to his friends and everything, and he'd pretty much been rejected by everybody. His father beat him. His father tried to murder him, basically. And I guess he had been involved with another young man, another homosexual man, and he had admitted to that, which in 1976 was against the law, and so he was charged, and he was in there, and he had also tried to take his own life after everybody rejected him, and his father nearly killed him. He tried to finish the job. Anyway, he never did me any harm. This isn't a story about Bruce, it's just to say there were two other people in the room, and that's probably why I was taken down to the washroom. Anyway, the guy would walk behind me with his hands on my shoulders, guide me into a toilet stall. He'd sit down on the toilet, and he'd have me turned around so I was looking at the door of the toilet stall. He closed that, and he'd put his hands down my pajama bottoms, and he'd fondle me. I never went any further than that. I never had to do anything to him, and he never tried to do anything other than fondle me, but that's still a sexual assault, you know, it's still a molestation, and I was terrified of that man. He used to scare me, you know, and he had a bad energy about him too, and it just I didn't care for him, you know, at all. I didn't want any part of whatever was going on. I didn't really understand what was going on, because in those days, an 8-year-old didn't really know about such things, you know. Anyway, again, pardon me for eating, but I've explained it, so. Anyway, on with the story. I did this several times. I never knew when he was going to show up, and I was kind of living in a state of fear. I was in a state of fear anyway, because I was really terrified of everything that was going on there. You know, these people were doing things to me that were making me sick and hurting me, and a bunch of strangers, you know, and stuff. I was in a big city by myself. My parents had to go home, so they weren't around. They came to visit, but that was it. I was homesick, and I was frightened. And I was literally sick a lot of the time, too, from these drugs they were running through my system. And now I had this pedophile coming and doing these things. Anyway, I used to even try to stay awake, because he used to wake me up out of my sleep, and I thought if I stayed awake, you know, an 8-year-old's brain, it will work this way. Goes to show how innocent I was back then, but I thought if I stayed awake, then I could keep him from coming. And I'd fall asleep, and then he'd show up, and I would feel badly that I was weak. You know, I wasn't strong enough to stay awake, and so it was my fault that he showed up. Anyway, one one of the times he was doing this, I heard a voice. Again, you may say, well, now we know you belonged in the loony bin, but I heard a voice. It was a woman's voice, and this voice, and I heard it just as clearly as if somebody was talking. I understood that it was in my head. I understood that he couldn't hear it, but I heard this voice. It was a woman's voice, and it was very firm but comforting, and it said, "Look him in the eyes. If you look him in the eyes, everything will be all right. But you must look him in the eyes." And when I heard that voice, the first thing I thought was Grandma Agnes. Now, it turns out I didn't know this at the time. Somehow I recognized that voice, and it was my great-grandmother. To this day, I'm sure it was. My dad's mother, who died in 1950, 18 years before I was born, because I was born in 68. My dad's father's mother, her name was Agnes. She died in 1950, and I never knew her in this life. Yet, and she was never talked about. Like, my family didn't really talk about the past very much. In fact, when I got a little older, I used to ask my grandparents questions like, how did you meet? You know, and did Grandpa ever try to sign up to go to the war during World War II and things like that? Because he hadn't gone into the war. But see, he was an electrician. I found out that he had tried to, but they wouldn't take him because he was an electrician. They said he was of more use here to keep the factories running and stuff. And so, they wouldn't take him, but he did try to sign up. And anyway, I found out the story of how my grandparents met. I found out all kinds of things, but they used to kind of wonder, you know, why would you ask? Because they didn't think it was interesting. I did, and I asked all these questions, and I'm glad I did, because I'm the only one in the family that knows a lot of these stories. It's only because I asked, because they never thought anybody cared. So they just didn't talk about those things. Anyway, I'd never heard about my great-grandma Agnes before. I'd never heard a word about her. And yet somehow I knew that it was her. Well, I felt a peace come over me, and I felt invincible. I just felt like nothing could hurt me. And I turned around, and I looked this pervert in his face. And when I did that, he flew into a rage, and he grabbed me by my hair, and he drove my head into the metal door of the stall. Just bounced my head off the metal door of the stall, and I saw stars. I nearly passed out. And he just growled at me. He said, "Don't look at me. Never look at me." And then he took me back to my room, and I never saw him again. He left me alone. Anyway, that's what happened. That's what happened when I was 8 years old. I'll tell you the story about after I grew up, anyway, a thing that happened. But I think I'm going to have to do that in another part, because I'm up to 14 minutes now, and I'm going to run out of room. But anyway, this is just part one, and there is a purpose to this, what I'm talking about here, because a good old friend of mine said something to me when I told him about the second thing that had happened. I never did tell him about the first thing, because I just never talked about it, really. It took me 30 years to tell anybody. I was 38 years old the first time I openly said anything about it, and I wasn't believed. So then I didn't talk about it again for quite a while. But anyway, I'll tell you the rest of the story. But this friend of mine said something to me when I told him about the second thing that happened. and it kind of tied everything together in terms of, demonic entities and how they operate. And he didn't even know that what he said was as profound as it was. Anyway, I'll tell you that story, my old friend Gord. But I'll tell Gord the farmer, But I'll tell you that story in the next video. Alright. Thank you for listening to me. You may think I'm crazy, but that's exactly how it happened. I can't explain it. I'm glad it happened, because I don't know, maybe that guy would have eventually escalated to doing even worse than he was doing. And what he was doing was bad enough, so anyway, I don't know. And I'm glad I don't know. I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I'm sure there were others there that got the same treatment from him. Maybe far worse. I hope not. I like to think not, but I'll bet you there were. Realistically, I'm sure there were, Anyway, that's it for now. We'll talk later.